Okay, my name is Gerald McSwiggan, and I am the Director of Issue Networks for the Business Civic Leadership Center. And I am joined by an excellent panel today. Margaret Davidson, the Director of the Coastal Center at NOAA, Michael Schmitz, the Executive Director of ICLEI USA, and Yalmaz Siddiqui, Senior Director of Environmental Strategy at Office Depot. So thank you all for joining us today. I think we're gonna go ahead and get right into this. This panel is about public-private partnerships and how public-private partnerships can be used to make our cities better places to live, more sustainable, that the economy and the environment is working well together. So, but before we talk about public-private partnerships, I just want to set the stage with an initial question, and that is that traditionally speaking, economic growth and environmental stewardship, has really been seen as an either-or proposition. So, I just wanted to ask, is that still true today? Is it changing? How do we change it if it is still true today? What are your thoughts?
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah,
absolutely not.
Yeah, Michael, you go first.
As both an environmentalist and a business person, I can say not. It's changing rapidly. I think there are still perceptions, but in real life, especially at the city scale, you're seeing it's a both and frankly, it's the strategy to move things forward. And as Lisa laid out in really an excellent overview, it's exactly how cities are going to move forward. So,
Gerald, could I go back to the history of sustainability? It was originally conceived as a sustainable development concept created by the World Commission on Environment and Development, essentially about how to develop economically. That's the start of sustainable development. How do we develop economically, but how do we do so in a way that manages our resources and so that they're not depleted long term, which would constrain economic development as well. So it really is about finding the both, and it's from the original definition of the term, and we've sort of gotten away from that, and we need to come back to it, I think.
Well, we sort of did develop this false dichotomy that it was economics or the environment. And what we've learned, particularly in the last decade, is that the environment is part of the economic sustainability. Not only are we historically a nation based on extractive uses, as are most great nations, but we've also learned that managing the environment, managing natural resources as though it were money in the bank and we're looking to live off the interest rather than the principal is actually a very sound concept. So I think why it was a false choice a decade ago, I've seen a great deal more dialogue and recognition that these things are actually interlinked. We cannot have a sound economy without a dynamic environment.
So is it just rhetoric then that we're here? I mean, is it cable news? Because if you listen to cable news, that may not be what's being said.
Well, some is, of course, oppositional politics, because that's what we thrive on in this country. How else can groups drive membership if they don't have someone to be in opposition to? But I think the other part of it, at least, and I'm coming from an agency that is both a science and an environmental management agency that's located within the Department of Commerce. So I think part of it was that until fairly recently, we were unable to talk about these issues in macroeconomics terms. So a lot of the science geeks that I hang out with use a whole different set of language than lots of the folks in this room. And it wasn't that we were actually talking about different things, but we were talking past each other. So one of the changes that's happened in the environmental science community is that we've begun to understand the importance of evaluation and monetizing things like what are the natural defenses that Mother Nature provides to us in terms of like flood protection and wave protection, which some cities in the Northeast have recently learned something about.
Mm-hmm. Could I add to that?
Yeah.
You can find fact-based evidence for all positions. and I think the people there are many things in sustainability that may cost more. But the time frame that you look at the cost choices might be very short. You might be looking at initial cost only and not a long-term cost to a specific entity or long-term cost to society. You might not be looking at the opportunities that arise and the economic benefits that arise from investing in those things. And there's also tremendous numbers of things in sustainability that are just good business, good growth in efforts from the get-go. Unfortunately, the facts on the it costs and is problematic have somehow risen above the facts around it saves and is good economically.
Yeah, I think there's two trends that I've seen that have led to this different paradigm. And one is, if you take it from the environmentalist perspective, people are looking at what you consider environmentalism, environmental protection, from just preserving nature in kind of a pristine sense to understanding that there's this integration of nature in our daily lives in the urban space, and that these are all part of how people live, and creating a better space is exactly what you do in a daily urban reality. So it's kind of, there's been a maturation of the way people look at environmentalism and an understanding it's integrated with our daily economic life. So that's from that perspective. I think probably more importantly, from the perspective of business, energy and pollution are coming to the fore as not just costs, but also potentially huge new opportunities. And if you look at the case of California, after passing AB 32, and then an effort largely financed by Texas oil interests to try to roll that back, George Shultz got out in front of that. George Shultz of the Nixon and Reagan administration got out in front and said, this is about economics, and this is about the new clean tech economy. And that led to a decisive defeat of that initiative, and it led it across the board in counties that had voted, if you looked at politics, had voted against Jerry Brown and for Meg Whitman. But on that issue, where it was very well defined, voters came back and said, this is about economics, and it's an understanding that new clean energy, renewable energy sources, and then also maintaining a reduction in pollution, because if you look at California as being a poster child for air pollution and such, especially in Southern California, and then what people experience now, which is hugely improved situation. I think people understand that this is not an environmental, this is not a partisan issue. This is about economics, is about their way of life, and so I think that's where you've seen a change, and I think it's a critical one.
Well, it's a change basically in our accounting approaches. Instead of being just focused on front-end costs, we tend to look at the whole life cycle costs, and that's important for businesses just as it is for the public sector. Right. And for instance, some things that seem more around the frame of quality of life, so urban parks and some of the other things that Lisa was talking about, we actually have some data that supports that it also engenders better public health, which in turn reduces the local costs, because most health costs are actually disproportionately borne by local governments as opposed to state and national governments, particularly the ones that aren't reimbursed by public or private insurance. But there are also persistent problems that leak over into other issues like crime. So understanding the full accounting and how things are connected, I think, is part of the maturity of our thought process over the last 20 to 30 years.
So, Yalmaz, I mean, is that what Office Depot is thinking about? Is that what you're thinking about in terms of, the sustainability of the whole city? How does that work from your perspective, from a company perspective?
Well, let me talk first about the company perspective, and I think what we've learned over the last, say, 8 years of practicing my focus is environmental sustainability. Practicing environmental sustainability is that the myths are just that. There are a lot of operational savings from carbon management, from waste management, from water management, in ways that advance environmental sustainability. So to give one very concrete piece of evidence, 427,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide in 2006, 281,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide in 2011, $65 million in energy costs in 2006, $46 million in energy costs in 2011. So there's a very concrete, very clear line between those two positions. From the city standpoint, I think, and this is now sort of getting into the next topic, which is public-private partnerships, but cities can only do so much with their own buildings, with their own operations, in terms of limiting environmental negatives. They have to work with businesses because the businesses represent the bulk of the building stock, the bulk of the employee base, the bulk of the impact, candidly. So our interest in this from Office Depot is to help persuade more businesses that this is it's not an either or in terms of business or growth in the environment. It is, as Michael clearly mentioned, a both and proposition.
So, Michael, just moving on a little bit to the public-private partnerships. What are you seeing out there in with cities and partnering with businesses in order to make communities more sustainable?
Well, there's a lot of very encouraging examples that are starting to take hold, and by context, folks may know of different examples of public-private partnerships that have not worked out so well or taken heat in the past or frankly been designed poorly. I think there's a lot of learning going on. Excuse me. Not a good time to lose one's voice, but where the lessons are being learned on how to both attract that private sector capital and then be able to have those accountabilities and transparencies that are so important. There are, and if this, there are too many examples. I won't go into all of them, but what we're seeing is, well, first of all, the context is that from a traditional 80% federal grants, 20% municipal bonds, cities just don't have the capital to be able to finance these things. Lisa laid out an excellent overview. Water infrastructure, you have that with a whole, infrastructure having to do with every other aspect of municipal infrastructure, which are, frankly, not just getting old, but decaying and crumbling and causing at a rapid pace. And the scale of what's needed to be done is something that, given debt of local governments, and given that also there's not an appetite for traditional local solutions like sales tax and other kind of taxes, it's just an imperative that cities turn to the private sector. As a result, for instance, Chicago has just developed a strategy to develop an infrastructure bank, which will be based as a nonprofit with rigorous oversight, but that will offer a new stream of revenue for massive potential profits from the private sector, but in a way that it remains in the public domain. And so that's a model by which you can come in as a pension fund, you can come in as a large institutional investor, look at very low risk, high return, long term kind of investment. And the only thing I would disagree on, Lisa, from an investor's perspective, that is sexy, it's because low risk, high return, and those now are going to be also be able to be controlled by the local government and be able to have the oversight, and so that it's both sides are winning. And I think that's the kind of model, figuring out the right financing, the right set of accountabilities, and making sure that it works both for the public and for the investors, because frankly that's where you're going to get the kind of billions of dollars that you're going to have to do, and that's at one city level. If you look across the nation, you're talking about trillions of dollars of investment. Now, I can say that there's a great deal of interest from the large institutional investors that are out there. We just had a meeting in December that President Clinton helped broker with the P80, which is a group of institutional investors from Prince Charles, headed up with such investors like CalPERS and the Korean National Pension Fund and other sovereign wealth funds, and the Club de Madrid, which are 80 former heads of states, coming together to look at how to get big institutional investors to invest in clean energy infrastructure programs at the city level. and they brought us there because they want to look at, we have a network of 1,000 cities across the globe. They want to understand what those projects are and how they invest in it. So if we can make it a very straightforward investment proposition where they understand, for instance, swapping out for LED lights at the city level, they can get a return on investment. They're willing to do that. That's exactly what cities are looking for, and that's the kind of partnership that I think you can really tackle these big investment challenges.
Mm-hmm. So, I don't see Rick Martella here, our board chair. So I'm gonna steal something a question that he's gonna ask. It's also a little bit of a preview. Hope all of you can join us October 9th and 11th for our CR conference. And it's a little bit of a preview on what Rick is going to talk about a little bit at the front end of that. But you know, the question is really, and Margaret, I'm going to go to you here, is you hear a lot about public-private partnerships, and it's sort of a buzzword, right? But are they real? Are they really effective? I mean, or is it just a buzzword?
No, it's not a buzzword, but let us also acknowledge we have to conceive of new constructs before we can actually make them real. So we've been talking about these things for quite some time, and Michael actually cited some examples, and I think in many cases, infrastructure, particularly transportation-related infrastructure, but increasingly other types of infrastructure, are some of the best examples. And the reasons for this is in part, well, let's acknowledge Uncle Sure doesn't actually have the money. Even if we do find the money to set up an infrastructure bank, everything that we have historically been looked to as the preferred base funder for, we're raising the state and local shares on all those kinds of programs. And the only thing I know that's trickled down is actually tax cuts. You know, you cut the federal government budget and the state and local government budgets suffer. And so increasingly, again, I think the action is totally at the local level. And in these kinds of communities, it actually begins to make sense for the economics that Michael and Yalmaz has mentioned. It makes sense, of course, for companies from a PR perspective, the good citizens perspective. But let me explain it to you from a different perspective. So I come from the environmental side of life. We know that the regulatory programs have only been moderately successful, and we also know that there's a huge sentiment for no more regulatory programs. So I think it's increasingly important that we have what I call an interventionist strategy. And that's one of the reasons I like hanging out with you guys, because there's hardly a local community in which the chamber is not at the table if it doesn't want to be. In many cases, it's running the table. And when my colleagues go to a pre-permit hearing, this is the way it's been for the last 20 or 30 years, we go to have a discussion with someone about the next big development project, and the reality is we're sitting down across the table from an entity that's actually probably already bought the land, paid $250,000 on architecture and engineering drawings, and probably another $250,000 on lawyers. Thank you very much. And all we're negotiating is marginal, around the edges. And in fact, we have to think differently about preferred development sites. One example, down in Mobile, when they were getting ready to think about attracting first a new steel mill and now, of course, a Eurobus, their first thought process about the preferred sites had a lot of those sites within the 10-year floodplain. But after looking at it from a more holistic and, dare I say, environmental perspective, they thought that perhaps they should really shift these 24/7 operations to outside the zone of the greatest hazard and the greatest exposure. That was entirely sound, risk-based decision process. It works out really well for them, and guess what? It actually works out nicely for the watershed too.
Yeah, just picking up on that, one of the things we've seen a lot of is, and this has been for some time, but it's increasingly getting into discussion, our insurance companies and reinsurance companies looking at the risk management and then trying to figure out how to deal with not just sea level rise, which affects the shorelines, but things like earthquakes and other extreme weather events as a very, very serious threat against future profits, and to be able to both protect investments and then try to be able to grow, knowing that growth is going to be happening in urban centers, knowing that you also have revitalization. So even if the urbanization in the U.S. won't continue at this pace, you'll continue to have revitalization. What will those cities look like, and how will they be resilient against both future weather shocks and then just energy shocks and things like that? And that's something that is taken very seriously by obviously insurers, but then increasingly property developers who are looking at creating communities. So when you create these public areas that are integrated, you're thinking about revenue streams and new lines of businesses that you're getting this kind of collective sense of that's a place that we're invested in. So being more resilient, that becomes one of those things that's now incorporated in business planning.
And it is the new buzz phrase, too.
That's true, too.
Being resilient.
Here's the buzz phrases, yeah.
But the U.S. is second only to Indonesia in the per capita disasters. We're the second most disastrous country on the planet. That's in a semi-natural sense, not a human-induced sense. And it behooves us to actually think about these issues then. Yep. A few years ago, this little old company called Lloyd's of London, some of you may have heard of them, they actually, so the guys who, there's the casualty loss insurance industry, and then there are the guys who underwrite the casualty loss insurance industry, the reinsurance industry. And they've actually, they've been spending more money on models than even the federal government has, like weather and climate models. And they wrote an open letter to their industry about a decade ago that said, if you're not paying attention to these extremes and this sea issue, then we highly suggest you consider a new line of business. Now, Lloyd's of London has historically been a fairly conservative company. I think that's why it survived quite some time, right? But this risk-based approach, and also let's rethink about how we do cost-benefit analysis. So the Army Corps of Engineers, probably a number of you know something about them, depending upon where you live, but they have something to do with protecting access to America's ports, where most of our goods are traded. And because of historical issues, the way they calculate the lifespan of their infrastructure and what they need to do to protect it is actually based on a cost-benefit formula that we developed back in the 70s when we were first creating a bunch of environmental programs. Now, this is actually a metric that's developed by this thing called the Office of Management and Budget, which is actually the part of the government that's in charge. Forget the part about the White House. It's actually OMB that's in charge. But how we thought about cost-benefit analysis 40 years ago, perhaps we need to shift how we think about cost-benefit analysis. We have a lot more information, not only about natural events, but let's acknowledge that we have a lot more information about the best ways in which the public-private interaction takes place and what are the benefits that inure.
So one example that I wanted to bring up is the Green Business Challenge. So Yalmaz, can you talk a little bit about that?
So I'll go back into history again. It really was conceived by the City of Chicago's Department of Environment back in 2007-8, and they decided to work with ICLEI as really the implementation partner. And the thought was that Chicago has a very aggressive climate action plan, but they're somewhat constrained in terms of achieving those goals if they only focus on themselves, if they only focus on their own buildings, their own fleets, etc. And given the point I made earlier on, that cities are made up of businesses and people, all of whom drive much of the city's impact. So the then Chief Environmental Officer in Chicago, working with Mayor Daley, conceived of this notion of a challenge, of a friendly competition enabled by the mayor to encourage any business, small to large, to engage in a series of activities with the goals to reduce their environmental footprints of different types: waste, water, energy, carbon, materials, and do so in a friendly way fun and sustainability don't often come in the same sentence. But it was positioned as a fun way to compete between businesses. So, in the first year, and Michael will talk more about this, but in the first year we had nearly 200 businesses of all sizes, from Goldman Sachs to hairdresser Y. I don't know the specific names, but a lot of businesses participated. They created green teams. They implemented actions that maybe many of them knew they could do, but they didn't necessarily have the framework and the structure and the call, sort of motivational call from city leaders to act. And it's been a very effective program. We're now in round 3 in Chicago. And Michael, maybe if you want to talk about the other cities and ICLEI's goals with the program.
Well, and just the public-private, just to point out, Office Depot is very strategic in supporting this understanding that it's often that delta that needs an injection of both capital but also vision. And Yalmaz has been driving this, and it's been a great success. This is where the local chambers play a particularly critical role and can really engage in a strategy that is, first of all, is about promotion of local businesses. And this is why, it's such a great program. It's a win-win, really, all the way around. The mayors benefit from engaging directly, from promoting both an environmental, something that's very politically popular, but also is very popular with local businesses. So, just following up on Yalmaz's overview on Chicago, just some of what's happened in Chicago already. $17 million have been saved by participants already in the first 3 years, reducing energy use by 6.7% and water use by more than 5%, and diverting, and I find this an amazing statistic, 43% of their waste. Now, anybody who's dealt with getting recycling programs up and running in cities, and especially with mandatory recycling programs, coming from California, it's very aggressive, but it's taken a long time. This is a remarkable statistic in just a couple of years. In Houston, the Green Business Challenge, Green Office Challenge, this is known there, has taken off starting in 2011. Their energy use has been reduced by 28 million kilowatt hours, water use by 74 million gallons. I mean, these are large numbers by this friendly competition, and diverted 40% of the waste from their landfills. So those are really significant, and a new program which could be viewed as a PR opportunity, which it is, and it's a very effective environmental program, and it's a good for business program, because the benefits go to those businesses which actually legitimately have provided a greener city, and people prefer that, and so it's all the way around a win. It's a very shrewd thing that Office Depot and Yalmaz has continued to support, and we're seeing it now. Great appetite for it across the country. We're partnering with Office Depot to do this in Austin, Texas, Bellevue, Washington, Chula Vista, California, Triangle J, Council of Governments, North Carolina, and now there are more than a dozen local governments across the nation that are doing this. So we're just getting started, but it's really taking off. And most recently, DC has launched its program, so we're excited to have that.
And I live in Charleston, South Carolina, which isn't usually known, South Carolina isn't known as a hotbed of progressivism, but certainly over the last 20 years, the redevelopment of our urban waterfront would not have been possible except for this relationship between the city, the Ports Authority, and a number of private sector, some developers and others not so much on the development side, in which there were a lot of puts and takes about pieces of property. So the port got some choices piece of property that would otherwise have been suburban real estate. And then the acreage that they abandoned on the urban waterfront, the city partnered with not just hotel folks, but even in the construction of parking garages. So there was some city bond money, but there was also a lot of private sector money. And Lisa actually showed a picture of our urban waterfront in Charleston, and it was responsible for a huge boom in tourism, of course, but also the associated snowbird retirements, and we just most recently done a public-private partnership to try and manage the ever-present floodwaters that we have, because we didn't have enough money to do it, but creating green spaces and creating more opportunities was actually viewed as a positive from the private sector perspective.
So it seems like a lot of great partnerships are going on out there. I want people to start thinking about questions that they have, because in a minute here I'm going to take a break and I'm going to turn it over to you to ask some questions. But before that, though, I wanted to ask one final thing to each of you, and that is, we've heard a lot of examples of good partnerships and this coming together, of the bricks and sticks, or the environment and the economy. What challenges are still out there? What's the biggest challenge still out there from your perspective? And how do we overcome it?
Well, I'm a coastal person, so I'm concerned about the 60 million people in the U.S. that are at risk of increased flooding over the next 10 to 30 years. And what do we do about that, particularly since we've had this headlong rush to the coast? It was temporarily abated by the headlong rush to the desert, but that's actually slowed up in the last decade, and the rush to the coast has actually picked up again if you look at the latest census numbers. So more people with more expensive property at greater risk. And of course, uniquely in this country, we demonstrate our generosity best after disasters of whatever nature. But that money that we're spending to rebuild New York and New Jersey, in the old days, used to actually come out of an imaginary account. It was all off budget. It now is required to come out of the accounts that everything else comes out of. So if you're a DOD guy, or if you get your money, everyone in this room has some economic relationship with the federal government, I feel certain, either directly or indirectly. And these increasing disasters and increasing properties and peoples at risk are going to actually squeeze out, I would submit, much more vital parts of our public investment strategy. So how do we better understand, communicate, and protect ourselves against increased exposure? That's, I think, an important issue, because we need that money for other things, like education, so we can perhaps continue to be moderately competitive in the world economic markets.
I'd say there are many answers, but I'll offer two, in my opinion, two key issues that need to be addressed. One is that financing right now, we talked a lot about some great examples. These are pilots. They need to be scaled. The scale of the challenge and the need is enormous, and frankly, that's just looking at a snapshot of existing needs. If you consider the impact of increasing intensity, increasing number of extreme weather events, you're gonna compound the both. So these pilots need to go to scale. So it both needs to be communicated. Investors need to understand there's a new market. Cities need to understand this is how you do it to create that opportunity. So that's a major challenge. Doable, but a major challenge. The other one's frankly political. And I'll just come out and say it. There has been a debate that has held back progress in this area about the nature of climate change, about these things. I think we need to get beyond that. That this has to be about resilience. Frankly, it's though the science is completely settled, that's not the issue. The issue is how do we go and become more resilient? So let's get past the symbolic debates, which have really stalled progress. I think city level leaders know that. I think chamber of leaders know that. I think mayors of any party knows that. I think at the local level there's an imperative to have action. I think that's where we're going to get a break in the logjam. So I think the other is political. I'm optimistic, but I think it's going to take some work.
So if I could crystallize what I see as the main challenge, it's how to effectively de-link growth from environmental impact. And I think we do that by finding the solutions that work. And there are many solutions out there that deliver against both agendas. And the important thing in terms of partnerships is to find the parties that have the core competencies to fix those problems. So what are the problems and who is best suited to solve those problems? And the parties that are going to come to the table with the core competencies are ones that also have goals that align to those, to solving that problem. So their business or organizational goal is to solve that type of problem, and they have the skills to contribute.
Well, that's one of the reasons I'm actually a fan of ICLEI, truly, because it has been such a great yentl for these discussions at the local level. And I would submit actually some more formalized partnership between ICLEI and BCLC could actually have a great ripple effect through your member companies and member chambers. I think that awareness and access to more of this kind of information, these tools and these relationships could be made possible.
Michael, we'll talk after the panel.
I like it. Okay.
All right, so I'd like to open it up for any questions from the audience.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Siddiqui, and first of all, thank you for Home Depot's leadership in this area. And I wonder what the role of the board of directors of Home Depot has been in encouraging
Office Depot.
these initiatives.
So I'm not sure about Home Depot because I don't. I'm not. No, it's okay. I could try and take a position on what Home Depot's doing. So the board has been supportive of our efforts in this direction, and actively, certainly some of the main board members have been probing around governance, environmental, social, and governance activities. We've had a series of questionnaires, detailed questionnaires from board members and investors, all of which help the executive committee understand that this stuff matters to investors and board members. And when executive committee understand that this stuff matters because they're being asked, it becomes relevant, and then they're more willing, the context that we're in, which is I think the role of the board, to frame the context in the right way, then activities can be pursued, investments arrive in the activities we want. The board really sets that overall tone within which this stuff can either be supported or not supported.
Okay, I don't know if this is live or not. My name is Peter Haig. I'm with the Nature Conservancy. We're an NGO that operates actually globally, but very much here in the United States. We are looking at how we can help build partnerships to create more sustainable communities. I like the focus on communities. I like the way Lisa set up the focus on opportunities for the private sector. We are looking at how natural systems can actually be integrated into large-scale infrastructure development. Great opportunities. My question for the panel would be, we've got the partnerships in many cases. How can we redefine the partnerships and start to instill more of a focus on sustainability in ways that are really business-driven, that drive decision-making, that's in the best interest of the communities?
Well, I'll take a crack and let you go. I talked earlier about how we actually need to change some of our terminology. One of the problematical issues is what I'll call costs or losses avoided. It's a very hard number to kind of calculate and put into your decision process, and yet we all know intuitively that it's very real. So I think we need to figure out how we do a better job of understanding and describing costs avoided in whatever calculus that we're doing. The other thing is, and again, that's why I like what these guys do and these guys do, there are very few individuals that don't wish to live in a vibrant community. Even in Detroit, they're trying to revitalize their public-private partnerships. So I think that looking towards local leadership and giving them the information and helping to make the connections among the different parts of the community are always going to be the key, particularly in a country in which the most critical decision making is at the local level. And by that, I mean planning and zoning.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree with Margaret on that. Yeah, as I agree with just about everything Margaret says, and frankly, I try to take copious notes whenever I have a chance to be with her, because I mean, to answer directly your question, Peter, I think part of it's marketing, frankly, and I think, you know, if we take a page from what, if you look at tourist bureaus, I was on a delegation to China with the governor of California, and they did a whole thing on Visit California. And what was so clear is this is a key part of driving business investment, new opportunities, whatever else. And you know, if you think about tourism as a model, a template, I mean, that's something that people understand very well. This is creating a public understanding of the opportunity, the excitement, the thing that kind of reaches the average, you know, your average consumer, your average resident. This is how you drive that, so that, you know, because we all go to a lot of these events, and you know, the most sophisticated understand all the details, but frankly, we're trying to change broadly people's behavior and create a new culture where people, you know, they buy into that idea, and I think we need to pay more attention to that.
I'm Chris Carmody. I'm from the North Carolina Research Triangle-based Institute for Sustainable Development. We just had an Office Depot Green Business Challenge recently, actually. What we see is a lot of good conversation here, and then we see a great deal of innovation both from business and from government at the local level. But it seems to me that sort of the weakness in the system is at the state level. There are some states that have amazing leadership, and there are some states that just seem completely disconnected and that have a great deal of impact on whether local government and local businesses are able to take advantage of these trends and innovate. Where do you think the leadership at the state level can come from, and do you think there can be a more comprehensive discussion that's a little more forward-looking? I mean, we have some unusual things going on in our state, but we're not unique there. We've outlawed sea level rise, for example.
That's good.
You attempted to regulate the rate of sea level rise.
Yes.
Let's be clear about that.
We can only judge it by historical standards, not models.
And I believe on the Colbert report they addressed that. I think the issue with governors is actually more complex because, of course, they're serving a broader, more diverse and sometimes fractious community. Mm-hmm. But I have heart, Chris, because my agency, along with some others at all scales of government, have been working very closely with the Western Governors Association on something you all may have heard about called Drought. As I like to joke, Senator Inhofe may not get climate, but he certainly gets drought. Because drought is a really important economic issue for this country. Not just the agricultural aspects, but if you're in Chicago, the fact that you couldn't move cargo down the Mississippi River to New Orleans is really problematical. And after we open up Panama to those bigger vessels, I'll remind you that China is actually a break bulk country, not a container cargo country. So the Mississippi River becomes even more important. I think that we have to figure out the strategy at the National Governors Association level and how to, I think it was Michael and maybe Yalmaz, how to depoliticize this, how to take it out of the realm of oppositional politics and discuss the things that are known are far greater than the things that are unknown. And let's just act on the things that are known. More frequent, more severe weather everywhere. Okay, so that's a given. That's a trend line. That's not a model projection. So working with the governors, how do we do that? I think we need to do that. I also am a big fan of working with the American Bar Association. Because actually lawyers have a lot to do with shaping policy in this country. And we often aren't well educated after law school on more contemporary issues. So I think working with professional associations is actually a way to go. in this country. The way we did the agricultural revolution was that we identified some people who were leading in terms of animal husbandry or crop rotation or crop management. A relatively successful model that we've exported to the rest of the world for good and bad in some places. But that model of ag extension, I think that we need to use on every problematical issue.
Additional questions? And I'm going to keep going till I get the hook here. So, whoever needs to give me the hook, give me the hook at whatever point. But I know there's a lot of additional questions, so we will continue to go. Question.
Hi, thanks. Actually, your question on the states was a great lead-in to my kind of comment, and maybe that you'll have a follow-on. But the state of New York, Governor Cuomo actually is doing some pretty amazing work. My name is Rebecca Flora. I'm with Ecology and Environment. We just finished the governor has basically split the state into 10 regions, which will get to my other point around regionalism. But in doing that, they adopted 10 regional economic development plans a year ago. And on the heels of that, now have just created, and our firm actually just worked on 4 of the 10 regional sustainability plans that were just completed in the state of New York. And those plans, and there's a whole story behind those I can share with anyone that wants to during the break, but must be aligned with the regional economic development plans. And the initiative has been phenomenal. And what we've seen, because we were in the trenches, in the field, working with these communities everywhere from the Adirondacks that are worried about maple syrup production to mid-Hudson that got slammed by Sandy in the middle of the development of these plans. The people that were involved in the public meetings, that came out, we had over 1,000 people come out of these things, was really quite phenomenal, and it was heartening to see folks in small towns all the way to great urban areas part of the dialogue. And I think part of what the governor's doing in terms of connecting these, the economic development plans with the regional sustainability plans, and the other thing that he did was there was essentially $1 million allocated to every region to do these regional sustainability plans. You can't do these things without the funding. So in that case, the state was stepping up. They were using RGGI funds, if you're familiar with the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative in terms of the states that have come together in the Northeast to actually use those funds. So it's a really great example, I think, at the state level. And I guess the challenge I want to put forth, and partly for Lisa also previously, is that it's not just about cities.
That's right.
We really have to be talking regionalism, because when we think about food flows and what is the carrying capacity of cities, there are limits to growth to still make them humane. And so what I'm seeing is a need to start thinking about urban planning from the standpoint of nodes and connecting to those food networks and to all the other things we need to be doing on that level. So what I would like to do, I guess, is shift the conversation perhaps to more of one of regionalism and how do we connect in these other towns. It doesn't have to be suburban sprawl.
Right.
It can be done in other ways. So I want to put that example and that challenge out to the group if you followed all that. Thank you.
Couldn't agree more, Rebecca, and it's absolutely critical point about regional, both how we grow and how we function, what the problems are. If you take water, and you take actually, I think one of the most encouraging, well, it's a challenge that it could be an opportunity in Texas. Drought is so impactful that you're seeing politics is no longer interfering with the need to deal with water at a really significant, in a significant way. And I think there's an opportunity there. But the way it's going to be dealt with is regionally. So Houston needs to incorporate and deal with all the surrounding jurisdictions, the county and frankly, no city is an island literally because they can't control everything that impacts their residents, nor is the local economy just local. So that's exactly the way we should look at it. And absolutely agree.
Well, we really can't afford to just have localized planning for public infrastructure anyway in an era of constrained resources. And folks most identify with the watershed in which they're found anyway. And of course, since we just spent the last 20 years tearing down all regional authorities and organizations, it is time to shift back towards a regional strategy.
All right. We have 30 seconds left. Yalmaz, Michael, Margaret, any last thoughts? 10 seconds each.
10 seconds.
10 seconds.
I'll give 15.
All right.
So I'd say, in terms of public-private partnerships, the question is how can we solve problems that are prevalent, and how can we do so in ways that align to the competencies and interests of the parties involved? And I'd say we uncover the interest by actually talking about them, being more candid about why the different parties are involved in this partnership, and really want to find parties that are interested in the solution. There's a lot of parties that are interested in the status quo, but there are equally large numbers of parties that are interested in getting beyond the status quo and finding solutions. And I would say that's fundamentally a free enterprise proposition. It's about innovation and getting beyond what is today, creatively disrupt and find the new opportunities in the future.
Shot clock's running.
5 seconds.
Okay, I got it from 3 points out. There's a real business opportunity in sustainability from the private sector side, and there's a real opportunity to protect the environment from engaging local businesses. There's a win-win on this.
3 seconds.
Everyone wants to go to heaven. Nobody wants to die. What we need to do is to enable public-private partnerships to thrive at the level at which they are most appropriate.
All right, join me in thanking the panel.